Welcome back to episode 45 of Blurred Summits. Today we're going to be talking about personality traits. We're going to look at the big five personality traits, and then we'll dive into the differences between genders, since there seems to be a pretty broad difference there. So Abdul, what is like a personality trait? And like how did these come to be?
So, you know, personalities are kind of like our supposedly inherent traits about ourselves. Mm-hmm. Now, there was a theory, the one that we're going to be talking about, is one way to define personality. It's called the Big Five theory, right? Or they call it the ocean theory, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And this was started back in 1993, was when it was really officially coined by Louis Goldberg. There were a couple other researchers, of course.
Was he the guy that made like those funny machines?
No.
Oh, that was Rube Goldberg or whatever.
Right.
Different Goldberg.
And but this idea wasn't new. So back in the 1980s, far before it was ever really published, this idea was kind of circulating around. And even way back, 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, Hippocrates came up with a similar idea, which he called it was a kind of the Big Four.
Damn, we should have learned this in Greek and Roman studies,
right?
Bro. Way better than medicine.
Yeah, so his Hippocrates had a similar idea. It wasn't too similar, but it kind of had the same trait, which was that there are categories to define personality. Okay. So we're going to be talking about the big five personality traits today. Now, a big disclaimer about what we're talking about. The big five personality traits, the reason that we're going to be discussing it today versus other personality theories is that generally it was found that the big five personality traits is the most consistent so far across time and culture. So there are other personality theories. The issue with them is that in different cultures, they don't work as well. Across time, they don't work as well. So this one seems to be the most consistent-ish. Okay. Now, it's not that great. Personality is a very hard thing to define and characterize. The other big disclaimer that we want to make today is that we're just expressing the views of what we believe to be the most probable.
The data.
We're looking at data from the perspective of the Big Five theory, right? There are social constructionist theories out there that will go against everything that we're saying. They'll say, everything that you're saying is garbage. And they do have a valid point, because that's just a different perspective where you can define personality, right? But the way that we're going to be talking about today is the Big Five. And so that's just something to keep in mind, before you guys start telling us that everything that we say is wrong. Okay. Yeah. So let's jump into it. The Big Five. I said it was like the ocean theory. So ocean is like a synonym, acronym. It's an acronym by which you can remember it. So the Big Five start off with, I guess if we're going with ocean, we'll start off with openness. I was like, you're going to start with an E. Right. So openness. What is openness? Openness is a characteristic that's defined by imagination and insight, usually having broad interests and generally correlated to intellect.
So it's how one uses their brain.
Kind of.
Like how creative they are?
It is kind of like how creative they are, but also how adaptable they are to seeing the world, right? Okay. So they're imagining, like for example, Elon Musk is very high in openness, because openness and intellect are very closely correlated. Yeah. So he has a very big imagination. He can see the world in a
mental
different
flexibility.
Thing. Mental flexibility, exactly. Usually these people have a broad range of interests because they're so open to the world. Yeah. They love all these different things, and so that's what kind of defines openness.
And I think that's a super interesting thing, right? Like is there like a scale for this, or is it just this is openness is?
No. So yeah, you can be high in openness, low in openness, and the range between those, it's like a big spectrum, right? Yeah. So it's not like you're a 3 out of 10 in openness, right?
Where do most people fall? Most people fall in the middle, or is it?
Yeah. So the average of society is, we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but it depends on your gender, but generally it's a normal curve. Generally, it's a normal curve.
Yeah.
Yeah. Openness and intellect is a standardized normal curve. There is actually no discrepancies.
Standard.
It's very standard in society. Yeah. So some people are just, high in it. Some people are low in it. So on and so forth. The next one is extraversion, right? So we all know about extroverts. We all know what that kind of means, but some things to define extraversion is excitability, which is get real excited about things. You're high in energy. Sociability, you like being in social environments. You talk well with other people. Talkativeness, you're a talkative kind of person. Assertiveness, and you're very emotionally expressive, right? So you go on emotional highs relatively frequently, and you're not afraid to show those.
So
right?
the opposite to this is introversion then. Is that what
Yeah.
this is? So that's what the scale is? It's introversion to
No.
No?
So the scale, their introversion doesn't exist in
Like
the big
it's
five.
Probably just like a low, someone that's
There's
low
just
in
low
extroversion.
extroversion and high extroversion.
But low extroversion would be an introvert.
Would be similar to an introvert.
Yeah.
Would be similar to an introvert. Like the weird thing about this is like extraversion and introversion is a different theory than the big fives. Like they're
But like if it's on that scale, right? Like it's obviously in the middle. You're like a what is it? Omnivore.
those words to define people. It's not from this theory.
Oh, but it uses
Like they just
extroversion.
use the same word, so that's why it's a
Okay.
little bit weird. But yeah, this one is just low in extroversion and high in extroversion. But yeah, low in extroversion, potato, we can call it introversion.
Okay, that's
Right?
interesting. Yeah.
Technicality sense, you're not allowed to, but who cares?
It is
right?
the same
Right?
thing.
It's Blurred Summits podcast. We can do whatever we want.
We ain't no
okay?
scientists.
Like, yeah. The next one is agreeableness. So agreeableness is characterized by trust, altruism, kindness, affection, and usually pro-social behavior. So kind of running through these one by one. Trust. People high in agreeableness have high trust in other people. They don't need reason to trust other people, right? So they're very trusting right off the bat.
Okay.
Next is they're very altruistic, right? So altruism is when you kind of do things for the benefit of other people, even if it comes at the cost of yourself, right? So people who are altruistic, they do a lot of volunteer work. They do they adopt 15 puppies. Like these are altruistic people.
Okay.
Okay. Kindness, obviously they're kind. There's affection, and the big one is usually pro-social behavior. So pro-social behavior is that they care more that the society succeeds than they succeed.
So to maximize the social well-being of
They
the
maximize
community.
the social well-being of the community,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Agreeableness is, we'll talk a little bit more about how that translates to the real world, but agreeableness is something that isn't promoted as much in Western societies, promoted a lot more in Eastern societies. So, people who are very agreeable in the West, you lose, right? Just because the society is very individualistic here.
Yeah.
Right? Canada, America, parts of Europe are very individualistic. We care more about the person succeeding than about
Society. Yeah.
about society.
Yeah, that one it just depends on like the societal norms, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm. And second last but not least, we have conscientiousness. So conscientiousness is basically very high in thoughtfulness. So you think about things a lot. They have very good impulse control. So self-discipline in these people is very easy to come by. They're very disciplined and they're able to do things without having to force themselves or negotiate with themselves to do it.
Yeah.
And they're also very goal-directed in their behavior. So they need to get their goals and they need to do them well. That's what defines conscientiousness.
Yeah, I think lots of people in like Western society have that thing, right? Where that drive to goal-oriented stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much in like Eastern culture, right? Because they're more about collectiveness, right?
Yeah.
But that goal-oriented thing can be kind of toxic, I guess, in a way, because you're so focused on that goal that you forget all the other stuff.
Western societies definitely value, like in the big five, they value a couple of things and they hate a couple of things.
Like I think it's funny how
is
it's
one
like
that they love.
how like having all of these doesn't make you like the best person.
Oh no.
Like some of these you want to have them like not low and
Yeah. If you want to win in different environments, you want to be low in agreeableness. If you're in a certain if you're in a very competitive environment, you do not want to be very agreeable because people are going to trample all over you if you trust every single person. Like, let's imagine you're like Napoleon Bonaparte or whatever, right? And you're over here taking over parts of the world, right? He was very unagreeable. He was very unagreeable, right? Same thing with Winston Churchill as a person. He was extremely unagreeable. And during war times, that was in his favor a lot, to be high in conscientiousness and low in agreeableness.
Yeah, but then it came back to bite him once the war ended.
Well,
but
tough luck, boss, right?
But yeah, being a war guy, you gotta stick with it.
And then last but not least on the big five is neuroticism. Neuroticism is characterized by sadness, moodiness, emotional instability, and tend to have mood swings, right? So these are people that are very turbulent emotionally, right? They're kind of all over the place.
So neuroticism, that is all it is, emotional turbulence. That is what neuroticism
That is literally what it is, yeah.
Okay.
So neuroticism is emotional turbulence. Another one in neuroticism is anger, right? So people who are high in anger are also high in neuroticism because they don't have good impulse control, right? And a couple of these, they're like negatively correlated. So for example, people who are high in conscientiousness usually are not high in neuroticism.
Well, that's kind of hard to have too, right? Like they're opposites, I guess.
Now you will get some people who are. For example, I would say that Steve Jobs was high in neuroticism and high in conscientiousness. He was extremely goal-oriented.
He wasn't thoughtful though, was he?
He was, thoughtfulness. Yeah, he was. He was extremely thoughtful. He was extremely thoughtful and creative as an individual. Not thoughtful of other people.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of getting
at. But thoughtfulness in the sense of he's thinking about things. That's what, like
business sense.
Yeah, no, yeah, I know.
Right? Like introspective.
I have never used that as the term thoughtfulness as in individual.
Yeah.
I'm like, it is not an individual term to me. But the more you know, I guess.
Yeah, but he was, very moody, emotionally unstable. I would say, I don't know. I didn't know the guy personally.
But I've heard, there's stories of him.
There's stories, right? So, easy way to remember it is ocean.
Not in the order we said it, though.
Yeah, we said it in the right order.
No, you said OE. You did see it like...
Oh, I did it backwards, didn't I?
No, you didn't. You just did it in a random order. You just said...
Okay.
I saw you tried to start it off and then you forgot. You're like, oh, well, here we go.
Okay, well, so ocean stands for O is openness, C is conscientiousness, E is extraversion, A is agreeableness, N is neuroticism. Those are the big five. Okay, cool. So, like we said, a person can rank high and low in these. Now, we're going to get into the real meat and potatoes, or like the real juicy stuff that's like, people argue about for their entire PhDs. Okay.
People make money doing this.
People make careers out of it.
Big ups, any universities want to hire us to do this?
Yeah. We might as well get a PhD after this podcast.
There you go.
Honorary degree at where? Harvard?
Yeah.
Wait, is that Harvard?
I wouldn't take anything less than Harvard. That's it. Okay. So we're going to talk about gender differences. So if we take a look at neuroticism, which is emotional instability, quote unquote, women rank higher in neuroticism in all of the subcategories with the exception of anger, right? Men rank higher in anger than women do in the category of neuroticism.
So in neuroticism, so under each of these categories, then there's all these subcategories that then go up and down that then affects like the total neuroticism score?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty much. Like some studies, it depends on the studies that you look at. Some studies, they just look at the big five as just holistically, as a whole, right? Now, the better of the studies are the ones that look at the individual factors within the big five. Because, for example, you could just say that women are higher in neuroticism than men if you look at it overall.
Then that's including anger.
That's including anger, but that's not true. Yeah. So the better of them is to look at each of the individual factors. Yeah. And that's what we're going to try and do.
Net holistically, this is the one, but it's because of these different factors.
Exactly. Right? Next thing is women rank higher in scores of agreeableness across the board. So just generally speaking, women are more agreeable than men are.
Which is understandable, I think.
Which is understandable. There's actually a bit of a, like, for example, let me give you an example of where this translates in the real world. They say that some women's products are marked up higher than men's products.
So not just because they're...
And so one of the reasons that a clinical psychologist would rationalize this, if they believed in the big five personality traits, is that they would say the reason is that because women are more agreeable, they're willing to pay a higher price. And in a capitalistic society, the company will charge just as high as the consumer is willing to pay.
Yeah.
So if the men, they're just so unagreeable that they see this price, they're going to be like, no, shut up, I'm not buying your stupid product. Right? Then they're just not going to be willing to pay that higher price for it. Right? Because they're just so stubborn. right?
Yeah.
So, some people, the social constructionists would say, no, it's because of other things, but that's just one of the rationalizations of it.
Okay, yeah,
right?
I think it does make sense. Like, it seems logical.
And it's not to say all of these differences, by the way, are generally speaking,
or like a average, I get her.
Summation. It's a generality.
Yeah.
So, on average, women rank higher in agreeableness than men do. Now, there are some very unagreeable women, and there are some very agreeable men. So the individual differences can't be compared, but if you look at a big population as a whole, that's where the comparison can be made.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, about, these differences is when you look at the differences, for example, agreeableness, the difference is very slight. It's a 60-40% difference, right?
Yes.
So, let's say you had, on average, it would be 50-50. If it was a perfectly equal world, it would be 50-50.
Yeah.
But instead of being 50-50, it's just 60-40.
Well,
so the graphs
10%
are slightly...
off, or they're just 10% off being
They're
perfectly
just
equal.
10% off. So it is a significant difference. When you're looking at statistical analysis, it does count as a difference.
Yeah, it is
It's not
considered
negligible.
significant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not something that you could just toss away. It does exist, but it's not like all women are agreeable and all men are unagreeable.
It's not like the graphs are completely skewed,
Exactly.
where then their poles are barely touching, and
The
that's it.
vast majority of men and women are the same level in agreeableness, and they're the same level in neuroticism.
Yeah, it's just the means are just 10% apart. That's it.
Exactly.
Or
Right?
20%, I guess, but like 10% off the middle.
Yeah.
So next up, when we look at conscientiousness, women score higher than men in order and self-discipline, but not in other segments. So, men score higher in goal orientation, but the goal orientation difference they found to be culturally dependent. So in some cultures, women are actually more goal oriented, but in other cultures, men are more goal oriented. Interestingly,
I think
enough.
that does make sense. That does. It's all the the cultural norms coming into effect with that one, right?
Like what kind of cultures have
So-
women being more agreeable?
No,
conscientious.
conscientious. So, I think if you look at some tribal cultures, they generally are a little bit less, more conscientious. I think perhaps some African cultures, I'm not exactly too sure, but definitely in Western cultures, they rank higher, they rank lower in
Just
conscientiousness.
because of traditional norms, is it?
It's tough to say. Plus, the people who are conducting these studies don't look at social construction as factors. So they won't look at how society is set up because they don't care about it, because they're not sociologists, they're psychologists.
Yeah.
So that's just something to consider.
Okay.
Next up, women score higher on warmth and gregariousness.
Define.
I forgot the definition. I was about to say that word. And let me just, and so they rank higher on that. So, sociability. That's what gregariousness. They like company. They like to be around other people, okay?
It sounds like something totally different.
Yeah, I didn't know what I would like. I couldn't.
It sounds like being a Viking, bro.
Yeah. And men score higher on assertiveness and excitement seeking. So usually men will do more activities that are excitement seeking, and that falls into place with extroversion. So generally speaking, both men and women are higher in extroversion on some parts of it and lower on other
different
parts.
areas.
Different areas, right?
Okay.
And, last but not least, there is no difference found in openness and intellect between men and women. So men and women are just equally as open and intellectual as one
intellect
another.
doesn't have to do with this.
Openness is exactly direct with intellect. In fact,
Okay, got it.
sometimes they don't even call it openness; they just call it intellect.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So those ones come literally hand in hand with one another. Most of the time, they call it openness/intellect. But yeah, so those are the differences. And as you can kind of see, the personality differences between men and women are overlapping in a lot of things. Like, women are sometimes more here, men are sometimes more here. So it's really just like a give and take. It's almost like a yin and yang.
Yeah, I think it's very marginal. Whatever the difference is, it's nothing too significant, right?
It's
significant enough for it to be statistically relevant.
Yeah.
But it's not like that big of a difference when it comes down to it.
It's not that big of a difference on average.
Yeah.
But now what we're actually going to dive into is, okay, so what the hell is the point of telling you guys all these differences? Like, if we're not just going to sit here for 10 minutes saying all these differences and then be like, and then in the end, our conclusion is, hey, by the way, toss out everything that we just said because
it doesn't matter.
Because it doesn't even matter. There are like predictions as to how this translates in society. So let me give you an example. We said that men rank higher in anger than women do, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you look at it, this is one of the reasons why they explain that most of the violent crimes are committed by men. Why? Because even though it's a 60-40% difference, it's slightly offset. The people who are the most angry, if we look at the 99th percentile of anger in society, take the 300 million people in the United States, give me the 100 most angry people. They're all going to be men.
Yeah.
They're all going to be men because the tail end of that curve is where it's all exemplified.
And it's 20% further than the other one.
It's 20% further, exactly. So that slight difference on average ends up making the biggest difference on the
the polls.
On the polls, right? And the same thing, if I took the 100 least angry people in the United States, they're all going to be women, right? That's what the statistic shows. And so that kind of explains why most of the violent crimes are committed by men, because to commit violent crimes, you got to be a pretty angry person.
Yeah. And if more men are on the higher end of being angry, therefore more men will commit violent crimes.
So that's a way to rationalize it. Now, there are other things to rationalize. So, for example, CEO positions are, you need to be extremely unagreeable and you need to be extremely goal-oriented or high in conscientiousness, right? Yeah. Now, agreeableness across the board, as we said, women are more likely to be agreeable.
Yeah.
And men are more likely to be higher in goal orientation.
And less agreeable.
Right? So now, if we go back to the United States, 300 million people, give me your 10 least agreeable, most goal-oriented people.
Yeah.
Put them in a line for me. They're all going to be men. And so when you look at the CEOs of your big Fortune 500 companies, most of the time, they're going to be men. So this is actually one of the ways that psychologists rationalize this difference. They rationalize this difference. Social constructionists are going to say, no, you're absolutely wrong because it's actually about how the company's set up, about society, about gender norms, which could absolutely be true. And this is just one factor in a multitude of factors that affect the end result.
Yeah.
But it is a significant difference.
And I think, that's the important thing, is that significance is the big term here, right?
Exactly. Right. And so, it's just reaffirming this point, which is that we can't say personality or biology has no impact on the real world. Like social construction is something like, if you go to them, they'll say that biology has no role to play.
I think that's
right.
That's super unrealistic. Maybe there's a combination of these two put together.
It's definitely a competition or a combination.
But they're both kind of taking their own opinions. But if you put them together, I think then it becomes logical. It's a combination of both, right? Like how there is some social stuff does have an impact on it.
Yeah.
But so does the behavior and who the person really is.
Exactly. And it seems like these are consistent across cultures and across time. So it appears that, some people might say it's the way that culture is set up. Well, apparently not so.
Yeah.
Right? Just some things to consider. Hopefully, some information that the audience didn't know from before and, we can kind of take away from it. But it's definitely interesting to look at.
Yeah, I think it's stuff that you don't really realize until you dive into the data and kind of look at it, that there really are these many different factors that play into decisions, who the people are, and all these other things, right?
Absolutely.
Like, people think people have a trait, it's oh, are you an introvert or extrovert?
Yeah.
That's it, right? But then with this one, it's look, there's all these, you probably named 30 different things that really come into play.
Yeah. Within extroversion, there's a bunch of different factors. And extroversion and introversion, it's not like a set one-on-one. It's not a binary 0 and 1 option. Yeah. You have a vast spectrum, by which it's defined.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. This is just some super cool information, though, for me. Like, it's...
Yeah, I definitely didn't think, like, personality played this much of a role. Like, obviously, it's not a big role, right? But it's definitely a factor that we should look into.
Yeah.
Got to call up those sociologists and be like, yo, so how does this and this play a role into society?
Yeah. It's like tons of political debates. We could sit here and debate for days as to whether the stuff that we said is valid or invalid. Some people might say it doesn't even matter if there are differences. That shouldn't even come into play. Even if we recognize the differences, that shouldn't have any effect on how we, run the world.
Yeah.
So just some interesting things to consider. Anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning into today's podcast where we spoke about the big 5 personality traits. Hopefully you guys got something to take away from the conversation. If you'd like to catch the full video podcast, you can watch us on YouTube. The full audio podcast is out on all platforms. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for daily content. You can also follow us on Twitch, where we will be going live every Sunday at 9 a.m. Mountain Time, where you guys can actually interact with us during the live podcast itself. And be sure to share this podcast with one friend who you think might benefit from the information. Thank you.